ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಚಾರ್ಜಸ್
ಸಣ್ಣ ಪಾಲಕ್ ಮಾಡೋದು
ಇಡೀ ರೇಡ್ ನಾವು ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಚಾರ್ಜಸ್ ಸರ್ ಏಕೆ ಆದರೂ ರೇಡ್ ಬಟನ್ ನಾನು ಚಾರ್ಜಸ್
मैंने बोल रहा इन मत जगह पे ही पूछा है
सर 8
हां
ये 1 मिनट कर देना ये ऊपर स्क्रीन को पड़े आसी आपको
प्रश्न स्टार्ट करूँ मैडम कौन तो इंट्रोडक्शन पेज टा दियो कौन तो स्टार्ट करूँ अनम्यूट करी
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Today is really a good day for the Department of the Political Science, Master College, Masagai. Today we have Dr. Ashok Kumar Acharya as our chief guest or chief speaker to participate as a chief speaker in the webinar. And at the same time, I thank our chief patron, Dr. Sir Kumar Jena, and all the dignitaries present here and all the students who have joined this seminar. And now I introduce about the guest. Guest is Dr. Ashok Kumar Acharya. He is a professor in the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi, and Global Justice Fellow at University. He received his PhD from the University of Toronto. He has edited Political Theory and Introduction in 2008 and Citizenship in the Globalizing World 2010. Besides publishing articles in areas of the multiculturalism, social justice, and affirmative action, he has been a at Australian Social Science Academy, Canberra, the University of Birmingham, UK, and has held the Henry Hart Vice Visiting Professorship in Yale Institute. His area of research interests into comparative and contemporary political theory, ethics and politics, and themes surrounding global and social justice. He leads in the interdisciplinary NAYA program on global justice at the University of Delhi in the partnership with Kenya Global Institution and funding from British Council. He is the team leader of Global Justice in the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs at the University of Delhi. He has recently founded the Center for Ethics and Politics in Global Affairs at the Institution of Social Science of New Delhi. So, yeah, it is our great privilege to have such a great speaker as a participant member in this webinar. And I also welcome all the members, all the teaching staff that joined from this college and other colleges. With this, and to everybody, and I request the chief doctor to take over.
Thank you, madam. Uh, it's my privilege. At the outset, I must welcome my friend, my classmate at Econ University, and my good friend, Dr. Ashok Acharya, who is working as professor University of Delhi. We are very much fortunate to receive him as our chief speaker the webinar organized by my college, the Department of Political Science. So at the outset I must welcome Dr. Acharya, who is having so many ratings to his credit as a good academician of the world, say to say the world. Though he is now serving at the University of Delhi, he has his PhD from University of Toronto, and many organization, many credit goes to him, and also he has compiled an introduction and citizenship of the global world, and many work at Australia and Birmingham, many parts of the world, and also is the leader of global justice in the Delhi School of Transitional Affairs, University of Delhi. He has recently funded the Center of Ethics, Politics and Global Affairs at the Institute of Social Science, New Delhi. I am very much fortunate Dr. Acharya is going to deliver some good aspects of political science, and though he is once upon a time he was having my good friend, but now he is working as a professor of political science, and now he is very much keen to express himself in regards to the today's political science webinar on the topic that is entitled democracy and is democracy and its practice. It is a very time-tested topic as selected by Dr. Acharya. So now I welcome Dr. Acharya to Marsagai College, a college which is being situated, situated in the district of Kendrapada, state of Odisha. I must welcome all the participants, those who have joined with us from the various parts of the state and the country, and all of my students, those who have joined with us now, and the faculties of my college and other colleges of the state, to this webinar which is being organized by Department of Political Science of my college, that is Marsagai College. And with this I must hand over the mic to Professor Menaka Appal, Professor and Head of Department of Political Science, and with me Professor Umesh Das, who is also present with me, the Faculty of Political Science. Now I hand over mic to Professor Menaka Appal to start the next work of webinar, and to request the professor, the speaker of the webinar, to start the webinar. Mrs. Pal, please.
Okay. Now I request Dr. Ashok Acharya to start his presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amir Kumar Jana, my friend of good old Utkal University days, for this invitation, and Dr. Menaka Appal for the kind introduction that you have given for me. May I ask if I am audible to everyone? Can everyone listen to me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, Ashok, we are audible to you. Carry on.
Okay. Then, very good. Thank you. And may I also now request one of the participants, Sutri or Geeta Das, to stop presenting, because you just have to click yes. Thank you. So that happens at times. The hand goes and slips and goes on the presenting button. So that is okay. My interactions with institutions in Odisha goes a long way back, and I'm also fortunate here to have in the audience one of my colleagues who teaches in Ravenshaw University also, Professor Niranjan Barik. I think I saw him as present here, and I'm most thankful.
Thank you.
And to all the participants who are present here, most of whom I think are students. And so I will pitch my lecture at a level where everyone can follow. And this is, I chose to speak on democracy because of what happened, what is happening around us in the world today. You all must have followed the elections in the United States, and how Joe Biden won and all that. And until a few months ago, many of us felt that democracy was under some sort of a threat. We don't know exactly what that threat was. It was going through some sort of a crisis. And I say this because I participated in a global project on Varieties of Democracy project, where I was one of the, I was a country expert, reporting on India and all that. And the Varieties of Democracy project had a very, negative outlook about what was going on in the world, what is going on in the world today. So, if some scholars believed, just 10, 20 years ago, that democracy is spreading came up with a report that, I think I have a accent, so I will switch off my video for the moment. So that, so I will switch off my video and then I will speak. Yeah, so the VDEM project came up with a very startling and a very negative outlook about the state of democracy in the world today. Basically, it said that more and more countries are losing the status of being a liberal democratic country or of liberal democracy. That is, more and more countries are becoming just democratic in the minimal sense and not really liberal democratic, because a liberal democratic country has certain features, and that is what is being lost because of a rise in authoritarianism in the world today. And so the Varieties of Democracy project pointed fingers at the United States, the United Kingdom, Brazil, India, and some other countries, saying that these are the countries where liberal democracy is gradually being eroded, and we are seeing a rise in authoritarianism in some of this states. So a rise in authoritarianism doesn't mean that democracy completely goes away, no. But some features of a democratic system are under threat. And if this continues, then some of the most prestigious democracies in the world might lose the status of being called truly liberal democracies. But before we understand this, let us go back in time to understand how did the idea of democracy originate? Where did it originate? And what were the ideas then, and how did these ideas evolve over a period of time? And how do we come to where we are today in terms of understanding what democracy is and what were the most powerful challenges in 20th century and what are the prospects for democracy in 21st century? Now that's a tall order. Will I be able to cover all of these things? I don't think so. But I will give you some sweeping understanding and a sweeping observations on some of these things. Though you are free to ask me questions later on as to where you think you can offer a better understanding, or you have some questions that you have not followed. So please. And in the meantime, before I go ahead, let me also request any one of you, if my voice trails or if you are not able to follow me, please interrupt me. Feel free to interrupt me and ask, repeat myself if you have not been able to hear me. But first check your own system also, whether the system is okay. So if we go back in time, let me just again try doing the video thing, because that brings a more better connect with the audience. I know, because we want to see the face when we are listening to someone, and and this happens in these online classes also that I do. Most of my students want me to switch on the video, because whenever the connectivity allows, look at me and all that. Otherwise, even I find it a little boring when I see everyone, that I'm speaking to a blank screen all the time when I'm doing these online lectures. But anyway, so going back in time, now we all have heard about the origins of democracy in ancient Greek city-states, or the Greek polis, as we call it. We also have heard the names of people like Plato, Aristotle, right? And these were the thinkers during that time. But we haven't heard other names, like for instance Solon, spelled as Solon. We have also not heard much the name of Cleisthenes, Cleisthenes, Cleisthenes. These have largely been ignored. And you might wonder, why did we keep hearing the names of Plato, Aristotle, but haven't heard much the name of Solon, Cleisthenes and all that? Now, Solon and Cleisthenes were reformers. They were busy switching Athens to a kind of a democratic regime through their own reforms that they laid out for Athens. Plato mostly, but Aristotle less so, were seen as critics of democracy. So isn't it an irony that around the time when democracy was taking roots in ancient Athens, the leading Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, would be critical of democracy itself? That's a little bit of an irony. But we have to understand what Plato and Aristotle, though my talk is not about justifying or defending Plato and Aristotle. And I will bring in Plato later on when we do the 21st century challenges to democracy, as to why is Plato still relevant today. So Plato was known to have given very strong views about democracy, saying that it is a rule by the mob, and it is a, in this rule by the mob, the expertise of a philosopher king is lost on us, and we don't know. So freedom is like a license, and everybody can do anything they want, and so people don't occupy their stations in life, that they are cycles through which regimes move from one to the other. Aristotle was a lot more sympathetic to the idea of democracy, because he carried out an empirical understanding. He had an understanding of the different kinds of regimes that exist. And of the 6 ideal types that he figured out, democracy was seen as one of the corrupt forms of regime. But if you read Aristotle's Politics, and especially from books 4 to 6, within in that. So books are like, so they are called chapters. So if you read chapters 4 to 6 especially, not the 1, 2, and 3, which is where he discusses what a political community is all about, or koinonia in Greek as it is called. But if you read 4 to 6, you will see that Aristotle gives many arguments in defense of democracy. And yet, so one of the puzzles in reading Aristotle's politics, critique democracy, knowing fully well that it is invested with so many good qualities or with so many good characteristics. So what is wrong with democracy then? So that is one of the puzzles of reading Aristotle and of trying to interpret him. And this is an exercise that, many who read Aristotle in original try carrying, as especially placing both these two books side by side of Aristotle. One is the politics, the other is, the second is, that is most of us read most of the time. So of the various city-states, Athens was just one of it, one of them, which is where around the 4th, and thrived to an extent that we all have profited it. It is not meant to, I don't mean to say that democracy did not take its roots elsewhere. It also did take its roots in Egypt and also in ancient India. And so these were some of the 2 or 3 different countries or civilizations, if you may call them, where democracy also sprouted, or what we might call small scale republics grew up, originating in these different localities. In Athens, when Solon was invited as a lawmaker, and this is something that Rousseau later on talks in his social contract as to why it makes sense to have a lawmaker from outside your country, so that the person is more neutral, is more fair towards the members of the political community. So the one thing that Solon was trying to bring about reforms in were to decrease, the gap was this, and he wanted to decrease the gap between the rich and the poor. So he thought that one serious political reform for democracy to survive and to flourish is to bring down the gap between the rich and the poor. And that narrowing of the gap was essential. So he said that, the rich were known as, in Greek language, called agathoi, and the poor were called kakoi. So he felt that, all the debts, money that the poor have borrowed from others, should be waived off. Unless and until that happens, we will never have a kind of an inclusive political community. So the first experiment of democracy began with a serious consideration of trying to bridge economic inequality that exists in a society. And later on, Cleisthenes, one of the subsequent and more detailed reformers and a more applied reformers, he applied himself very seriously, was to break the distinctions between the city, or what he called the demes, D-E-S. So the demes were seen as equal to each other, and anybody who lived in any demes were to be seen as, so it was the first admit, and so that sameness had to come to every deme, according to going to the details of it. But these are important points. So one reformer harped on the other harped on the theme of belonging, carried for dream of trying powerful and a successful democracy. We also know simultaneously that these Greek city-states, including Athens, did not give equal weight to all the citizens. This work, for instance, women were excluded from citizens, slaves were excluded from citizenship. But in order to understand what Aristotle was saying, we have to understand what he's trying to argue. So we all know that Aristotle said that man is by nature a political, or zoo politikon, as he called it in Greek. Man is by nature a political animal, or a zoon politikon. What is that distinctive feature in that is not present in others, in other being is so Aristotle says that there are two things that separate human beings from others. One is our deliberative capacities. These two things are unique to human beings. And by virtue of being endowed with such qualities about what is good, what is bad, unjust, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful, what is moral, what is not moral, on these things. So anyone, as per Aristotle's understanding of that man by nature is not, is a little gender, so we could say human being by nature is political, applies to every human being, even if many of you who are in this audience will claim that we are not political. But even if you say that you don't believe in politics, or you are not a political creature, what I'm trying to say are two things. An Aristotle, or a very critical understanding of what real politics is all about. So there is a difference between what the ideal is and what the real is. And because the real is swinging back to this whole question, it is important that whenever we keep on deliberating between what is good, that we are not bound to have one in any political team. Though one, and the very fact that this process of deliberation is this, that in spite of our differences between these gaps of differences keeps narrowing over a period of time as we try to be reasonable in trying to accommodate everybody else's views. So I know they are very powerful or strong, and your knowledge as equally powerful and strong. So democracy begins with a certain kind of a deference, a respect for others' views. And unless that happens, we cannot be in a political community and still claim to be democratic where we are intolerant of others' views. So who basically is a dictator or an authoritarian? One of the ways in trying to understand what dictatorship or authoritarianism is of trying to quell, is of trying to suppress others' views and expressions, and so it basically says that people's views over mine, and so I'm intolerant of all other views that oppose mine. So democracy begins with this kind of a differential understanding of people's difference. So this is that is highlighted in Aristotle's work, where he speaks about the necessity and the desirability of deliberation, right? So this is one significant takeaway from Aristotle. I don't want to go into the details of how we can best understand and interpret Aristotle. There are other kinds of challenges that came up in the 20th century, for instance, about what is his understanding of the community and all of that. But I'm not going into those things at this point of time. The city-states were small, and one of the persons later on, much later after Aristotle, who tried to revive the ideal of that city-state was, you may have come across this name, called Rousseau. Rousseau, who wrote the Social Contract, where he was extolling the virtues of the small city-state. Why? Why was Rousseau talking about the city-state? Because Rousseau was talking about the general will. But more importantly than all of this, Rousseau was trying to say that the will that each of us possesses, the real will, for instance, that is mine, and that cannot be represented by anyone else. The will can never be represented. That is why he said that the United Kingdom, or Britain, citizens in United Kingdom experience democracy only once in 5 years, when they go out to vote. So only once in 5 years you experience freedom. That is when you vote. Rest of the time you are enslaved to a representative system. So Rousseau was the pioneer of the will theory, and the will theory, or the will understanding, doesn't allow any sort of representation. So Rousseau stood as a bridge between the ancient democratic model and the modern democratic model, because he also spoke too about other features, about the whole possibility of what majority voting must be like, given that there is a certain kind of an overriding significance of the general will, right? So after Rousseau, there were many other developments that took place, and most of these states were growing in size. And so when states grow in size, you have different classes of people coming in. And different classes of people are no longer influenced by the possibilities of generating a general will. Most of these different classes of people then develop their own very strong intrinsic class interests. And class interests can be of many kinds. So from there on, and especially from the works of Montesquieu, and later on through Hobbes and Tocqueville and others, you get a sense of how modern democracies, because of their size, their big sizes, are no longer interested in the value citizenship and all of that. It was more about the interest basis. And so, Hobbes comes along, though he doesn't talk about, actually alluding to a class individual. What Hobbes is trying to say is important, given what Rousseau has already, says later on. So, prefiguring Rousseau's work is Hobbes comes along to tell us that, I have a certain interest in my survival, and then you can amplify the whole understanding of survival or security in different dimensions. But that security, that interest of mine, I can repose in another external authority called the Leviathan or someone. So basically, Hobbes is trying to say that my interest is detachable from me. It is not attached for the rest of my life. I can detach it. I can detach it from me, and I can claim. And so one of the things that we derive from Hobbes, which goes then to make up the understanding of a modern democratic system, is that interests can be represented. Rousseau would come later to say that yes, interest can be represented, but will cannot be represented. So here are two different trends that emerge in political theory, and give us a deeper understanding of what democracy must be or should be all about. And so these are two different schools. So from the will theory emerged of what is what democracy can be, and all those things. So the participatory theory of democracy is then okay, I'm having some problem with my connectivity anyway. So the Hobbesian understanding of what we call the interest then becomes as an idea, developed as a practice, but is also influenced by other kinds of institutions that came in place. So representation was an independent thing and emerged, let us say, in the king's court as to who represents whom and all, and later on it becomes, it gets so the gets intertwined like democracy. So there's also emerge. And that gets need a constitution also exists for other kinds of non-democratic regimes, but they are seen as a founding moment or a founding document of any democratic regime. They the division of powers, particularly between the state. So both vertically and constitution is all about. So the simplest definition of a constitution is that it is a statement, a political statement in limited government, so that the government needs to be limited by, and so we can limit a government horizontally by curing the liberty of the citizens, vertically. So we limit the powers of the government. That's what a constitution is ideally understood to be doing, right? So this is a different idea than the idea of a constitution that was there in Aristotle's time, where the constitution meant a mixed regime. But I'm not getting into that now. So after the French Revolution and all of this, the whole idea of democracy was blossomed to such an extent. And in around 20th century, another person coming in, for instance, I'm here speaking about Joseph Schumpeter, who wrote Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy. If you want, you don't have to read the whole book, but as students of political science, I will ask you to read chapters, especially where he gives a kind of a critique of the classical conception of democracy or the Greek conception of democracy, and a critique which also includes. So straight from a normative level, we are brought down to an empirical level. Normative means norms, meaning values and all that. So, and straight to an empirical level. But before I discuss Schumpeter to you, I would like to make a distinction between two basic major understandings of a democracy. So the first is that democracy has an instrumental value. democracy is what democracy does. Right? So we ought to, if a regime is democratic, only if it has certain consequences. So it is basically when people give an instrumental version of democracy, they say that well, democracy is just the backbone of a government. So it is made up of certain institutions. It is a regime, an arrangement of power sharing. That's it, nothing more. So how should people share power inscribed in the constitution and otherwise is what a democratic cluster of institutions put together to secure a certain kind of a power sharing arrangement. Now, this is fine as far as it goes. An instrumental understanding. So, PC is best, which produces the greatest good of the greatest number. So we are only talking about institutions can produce certain kinds of consequences that we hold to be desirable. Though different people will have different understandings of what those desirable consequences can be. Right? And it changes over a period of time. And there are those instrumental understanding of democracy speak about the intrinsic worth of democracy. That is, democracy is good in itself, is a good in itself, whatever the consequences may be. Right? So, you must have gone through some such debates even inside your own family, for instance. At times you must have held the view before your parents that I must speak out my view, whether, and when you say that, you are basically adducing to an intrinsic understanding of democracy, an intrinsic conception of that democracy is a good in itself, whatever the consequences of a democracy are. Right? So, human beings, and then you can fall into some of those, take recourse to some of those natural rights theorists and others who say that by the simple coincidence of being a human being, you are already endowed with certain natural rights, and those that you enjoy, maybe as the social contract theorist said, and those that cannot be taken away from you. So intrinsically you are born to be free. And as Rousseau himself says, that man is, but everywhere he is in chains. So that was one of the most powerful cries against the shoulder of oppressive institutions and structures, saying that man is born free. So when you say man is born free, you are basically alluding to an intrinsic understanding of democracy. The democracy, I'm born free and to exercise my choices, and nobody should interfere in these affairs of mine, right? And given this understanding of what that intrinsic understanding of my liberty is, I find a kind of a natural overlap between who I think I am and what I think should the favorable conditions of my existence be. So there should be a natural overlap between these two. And so that is an intrinsic conception of democracy. The democracy is good in itself, irrespective of whatever consequences it produces. So please remember this distinction, because this distinction has come to weigh heavy on us as we try to make sense of the continuing relevance and value of any democracy today. Right? So, around 20th century, when Joseph Schumpeter was discussing as to why democracy is to be seen and evaluated more in descriptive terms of, Schumpeter said that, well, we can't actually realize what Rousseau was talking about in terms of, trying to make a certain kind of a conception of, sorry, did I say Rousseau? Well, yeah, I'm just digressing here at this point of time. Yeah, anyway, I will come back to the point in a while. So what Schumpeter was trying to say was that, yes, I was alluding into Rousseau. So his critique of Rousseau was that, you just can't make things happen the way Rousseau projects the ideal society to be. And so so the general will is a dream. It's a dream. It never happens. It never happens in real life. So Schumpeter gives a competitive understanding of democracy, a competitive model of democracy. So democracy is where different political parties come to contest each other. Now this is a theme that was developed more by Robert Dahl later on, the Yale political theorist, Robert Dahl, and he developed it a little bit more. It should lend credence or value to not just the of power, that power can be contested in any democracy. That was central to Dahl's understanding of democracy. Some of you who can download, let us say, Robert Dahl's book on democracy, right? It's a small book, छोटिया बहिटी है, बहुत बढ़िया रे लिखी चंती, और बहुत भलो रे बुझेई चंती, बहुत simple भाषा रे बुझेई चंती, right? So you can download on democracy. It's a very small book and meant for undergraduate students also, basically for undergraduate students. So try download that book from the net on democracy. If you cannot, I will send a copy to Amir, and he can share it with everyone else, or with the Department of Political Science. Do download that copy, and it's written in a very plain language. Now, what Dahl does is that he also doesn't subscribe to the classical ideal model, but when he is talking about contestation of power, so what does contestation of power mean? So unless we have this principle of contestation of power, we cannot have a system, a democratic system, where there are various political parties. So the presence of various political parties is essential because they all imbibe the principle of contesting power. So if there is a government, there has to be an opposition, and both of them are engaged in contesting each other, and the opposition more so because it contests the power of the government. And unless and until there is a strong, vibrant opposition in any democracy, no democracy will ever survive for a long time. So you have to read between the lines. But what Dahl does, following a little bit of what Schumpeter does, is to then speak more about what makes a democracy, and then he gives us, a list of those different examples of institutions. For instance, free and fair elections, necessary for a democracy. The presence of political parties, necessary for democracy. Freedom of speech and expression, because you can't have different political parties without free and fair, free speech and expression. So you need free speech and expression, and you also need political parties. You also need free and fair elections. But this is a list of all the different institutional requirements of a democracy. Sometime so there was an ideological battle, let us say, during the Cold War time, between liberalism, communism, and all of that. And so people then felt that alongside these all different institutional arrangements and requirements, we also need the institution of rights. And that is what comes more strongly around the time the Cold War was taking place, and there was an ideological conflict between these different poles in the world. And that is where the whole idea of human rights also emerges, and the West, basically the Western countries, then champion the whole question of human rights, saying that this is what makes a difference in how we and why we call something a democracy and why we can't call something else as a democracy. And then they gave more importance to political and civil rights than social and economic rights, which were given more importance to by the communist regimes and all of that. Now, what happened after that? And after, the Cold War has ended, and we are in a different state now, and there are so many different democracies, and yet democracies are under decline. And so, what has happened in the meantime? So, I will here, because of paucity of time, I will now devote around 10 or 15 minutes. Is it okay, Amir? I will just set aside 10 or 15 minutes to talk about three different challenges.
Okay then. Okay.
Yeah.
Another 10,
Okay.
15 minutes.
So I will talk about three different challenges to the idea of democracy,
Yes.
basically drawing upon the ways in which it is practiced today.
Okay then.
The first challenge, I will say, is about the quality of decisions themselves. So we know that democracy is a decision-making arrangement where everybody gets a free, fair, and an equal chance to participate. So everybody gets an equal chance to participate, which is called political equality, that one man, one vote. So everybody gets an equal stake in that. And we produce decisions. Some are bad, some are good, but only on hindsight we try to understand. Now, the quality of decisions are dependent on the decision-making process itself. And that is why some give more importance to the process itself and some give more importance to the outcomes of the decision. So what are the outcomes? Like, do they subscribe to a particular ideology or not? And so your conception of a democracy might be different than my conception of a democracy because of what we expect at the end in terms of outcomes, right? So you may contest my understanding of what an outcome conception of democracy may be, and I might contest with yours that should democracy promote social justice? Should it promote more liberty? Should it promote more? So then what happens? And then the proceduralists, those who believe in the process, in the democratic process, will point out that let us not think about the final outcomes. Let us think about the process itself. Is the process fine? And so, along with the instrumentalists and the distinction between the instrumentalists and those who believe in the intrinsic worth of democracy, there is also a kind of a seesaw battle between those who believe in a procedural model of democracy, whatever the democratic outcomes might be, and those who believe in an outcome conception of democracy. So 20th century, what happened is that the outcome conception of democracy was ideologically weighted. So if you believed in a particular ideology, you would say, oh, I'm let us say, I'm a socialist and I believe in a people's conception of democracy. And somebody who is a liberal will talk about a liberal democratic model of democracy, that this is the best model, that we must have some rights. And so, with regard to democratic process itself, no one democratic theorist has given us the best foolproof mechanism of how to balance the weight of the majority. So, in democracy, it is very well understood that the majority must make the decision. So the majority meaning 50 plus 1. 50 plus 1 makes a majority. And they must have a say in what kinds of decisions we ought to have. We also know that in this, so the principle of majority rule is the central feature of any democratic institution. We don't dispute that. But what happens is that some clusters or groups of people remain minorities. I'm talking about electoral minorities or political minorities. I'm not talking about the religious minorities or caste minorities and all of that, though that also has relevance. So I'm talking about political minorities. So some classes or groups of people will always be political minorities in any kind of a democratic regime. Now, when that happens, and when the only you look at the views of the majority, then the quality of decisions can be compromised or may suffer. But the quality of decisions also suffers because most of the time our understanding of particular situations or of particular issues are constrained by inadequate knowledge. So we don't always have the knowledge to decide on everything, and that is why at times our quality of decisions also suffer. So democracy is not a foolproof mechanism of always going for correct decisions. We at times can make wrong decisions and we learn from it. But do we really learn? And so some people point out, pointing a finger backward at Plato, that look, he was talking about philosopher kings, with people who had expertise, people who had knowledge, right? So if we want to root out, let us say, black money in a country, then we should be trying to rope in economists and listen to their views about what they have to say, to political scientists, for instance, to listen to their views about how do we tame the whole question of corruption. At times, leaders will not. They will always have a conflict of interest, chiefly because most of the leaders are corrupt, we know. So they will have a different understanding of what corruption is. So the quality of decisions is one huge challenge today. That is, how do we enhance, increase, or augment the quality of decisions itself? And so that is a central challenge, and we don't have one ready-made answer for it. Nowhere in the world we have found a ready-made answer. But we are constantly trying to figure that out. It doesn't mean that if you don't have the answer, or it is very difficult to get, that we bypass that. No, we cannot. It remains a challenge for any democracy today. The second one was what I was speaking in conjunction with the first one itself, that is the decision-making process, or of the value of inclusion. If we have to go back to Solon as to what he had said about how do we decrease the gap between the rich and the poor, what lessons have we learned from there for today's benefit? Have we really decreased that gap? And does the decision-making process include people who may be in a minority, but also that we get to listen to their voices and then decide accordingly? Because it is not just a seesaw battle between institutions. So whereas legislatures protect or promote the interests of the majority, judiciary is to be seen as that institution which then protects the interest of the minority. So majority rule in the legislature, minority rights in the judiciary is a perfect balance that puts a democracy together. And if you have, and that is why we need an independent judiciary. We need an independent judiciary because of the separation of powers doctrine, but also because an independent judiciary is the best guarantee of protecting the Constitution and also the constitutional principles, including that of the rights of the minorities. So we find a kind of an institutional balance. And yet this balance is not always perfectly carried out. Why? Because from time to time, we keep redefining to ourselves and to others as to who we the people are. So at times the people of India, at times we exclude many who may be belonging to a different faith or a religion or a caste or so on so. So we the people depends on who is speaking it. Who is that person who is speaking about we the people? So decision-making process itself is under severe challenge of making it lot more inclusive, of bringing in the disadvantaged, the minorities into its fold. And that challenge is not yet complete today. The third challenge is what we call the nature of the decision makers themselves, that is the citizens and the leaders. So what are their virtues? Right? So from the classical times right up to Rousseau, we were still talking about the virtues of a citizen. That is, what qualities must a citizen have? Right? Rousseau believed in the moral transformation of the citizen to such an extent that debunking or rejecting his own selfish actual will, he endorses his true will that is in consonance with the larger general will. So, for Rousseau, to arrive at the general will is a requirement of morally transforming each and every citizen. So, Rousseau's model of democracy is premised upon the moral transformation of each and every citizen. And that now nobody talks about. So, and the switch took over from Tocqueville's work itself. I don't have the time to explain Tocqueville to you now, but if required, in today's time, we somewhere believe that institutions will bring in a virtuous character in citizens. Earlier, we had thought that those values of a citizen were independent from the institutions. Now we think, because the democracies have grown in size, that the institutions have become more encompassing and the values are then we want to see how the institutions promote the particular values or the virtues of citizenship. But it was never the state's work to promote or to create virtuous citizens. If you look at Aristotle's work, you will notice that he talks about the various values that he talks about. He talks about phronesis or prudence. So prudence was seen as one of the biggest virtue, both in a citizen as well as in a leader. So here we are, we have not yet addressed this matter so far. And we are still looking at all solutions to all problems themselves, forgetting the fact that as responsible citizens, we have to have a certain virtue, a certain character to ourselves. And that is somewhere lost. And if you look at the social media and the kinds of things that people write, you will understand how there has been a big fall from an earlier expectation. And this is something you must be hearing from your own parents also, that, and there is a huge, so that generation gap can also be understood by a fall in the idealist standards of today's human beings. And that also has an impact on democracy. So a democratic regime succeeds or fails depending on the kind of society we are making it to be. We are to be blamed for the kinds of leaders we have. We are to be blamed for the kinds of systems we have. If there are certain violations of rights or of liberties of particular people or groups, we are responsible for it. So in some ways, these are the three different kinds of challenges that have come forward. So the first is about the quality of decisions. The second is about the process itself. Is it inclusive or not? And the third is about who are we and what are our virtues, including the leaders. And so these three things, all different, critiques of democracy boil down to essentially these three challenges. And so from its practice, we deduce many troubles, but then ironically, when most of the democracies are becoming authoritarian, there is a huge urge and a necessity of having a global democracy. That is evident from the fact that we are interested in who is becoming the President of the United States. Because we know that the President of the United States will have a huge say. Of all the things that Trump did, what bothers us most is that he withdrew support from some of the multilateral organizations like the World Health Organization and all of that. So we have a stake in those multilateral organizations. There are different ways in which some countries can behave which will have an effect on the rest of the world, because we are living in a global. And many people have started thinking about what does global democracy actually entail. And so when we are getting into that stage, we are here confronted by some authoritarian populist regimes. And though their numbers will quickly go away, but there are others compared to Trump who are much more wily, who take their leaves out of Machiavelli's Prince, and they are much wiser, I won't call them wiser, but they know, and they are very clever in trying to deal with populations and with majorities and populations and their citizens, and they know how to hoodwink them, and they know how to carry their games forward. And so these are some of the leaders we have to be aware of. And this is where so when we should be addressing questions of global issues, we are being drawn back into our own political community to fight the demons, that act against the best interests of any democracy. So I hope I've been able to generate a little bit of an interest in you to help raise some questions that I'm happy to answer. So with this, I end my talk today on democracy, and look forward to some questions. And I thank you for your patience, for listening to me. I know that it has been a little theoretical, but I've covered a lot of ground. And if I have not been able to cover something by way of my answers to your questions, I may be able to do justice to things neglected. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Acharya. It is a very brainstorming expression of your intellectuality in regards to democracy and its practice. Thank you for your kind appreciation and presentation of the facts. Now I request my colleague to students, if anybody having any doubts, to interact with Professor Acharya, any question. Then I am requesting Professor Pal and Professor Das, please go on ahead with the students monitoring the things that.
Can I ask Acharya? I'm Niranjan Barik. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Hello. All the students, do you have any doubt about the democracy and its practice? And if you have any doubt, you can ask our.
But I would like to ask a question to Professor Acharya. First of all, I must congratulate him for a very excellent talk on democracy, very important today. But you have said on 3 challenges that we face in contemporary times. One is the quality of the decisions, and where you have said that knowledge and information is necessary before a decision can be rightly arrived at. So that is the quality, and you have just alluded to the information for that. And secondly, you are saying the decision-making process where it should be inclusive, and where you cited Solon as the law giver, talking about the bridging the gap between the economic gap. And the third thing you have said, the nature of decision makers, that is leaders and citizens, and maybe either in all these things something comes in, that is, who are we? That is the identity as Indians, or the exclusion or inclusion issues. Out of these 3, Professor Acharya, that is the quality, process, and who are we, which one is most important, you think?
Okay, if I may answer this question, and for others, those students who can't make themselves, who don't want to speak, you can also write down your questions in the chat box, and I'll be happy to answer them. So yes, Professor Barik, you have raised a very important question as to which one of these are important. I find them to be all equally important depending on what is the issue that we have at hand. And if you are looking at maybe if you are putting in the background the Varieties of Democracy Project report and all that, I would somewhere claim that the third one becomes very important. So the quality of who we are, of our virtues and all of that. I think that becomes very important, and a time has come when we should be dealing with these things independently. So we don't need a charter on fundamental duties in the Constitution to tell us what a citizen should be doing. We should somewhere be trying to train ourselves, and those were happening in earlier times when there were, those citizenship schools or schools of training in citizenship and all of that. And even Tocqueville talks about that, but in the American context, but he talks more about the civil society associations and how they train the virtues of citizenship. But in different ways, I still think that one of the virtue of any citizen that becomes very important for us is holding ourselves, making ourselves more reasonable, of trying to put ourselves in others' shoes, listening to those differences of opinion much more seriously, right? So that has become one of the biggest challenges. Though I would claim also that the first one that I spoke about, the quality of decisions, has also become very important, because in this world today there are many issues that we don't quite understand well enough today, and we don't have the knowledge and we don't have the expertise. But if we give too much of significance to those who have the knowledge or those who have the expertise, then we run the risk of converting a democracy into a technocracy. There have been very significant discussions on this, and I have been at a philosophical level, but also at a pragmatic level too. I have been very interested in looking at the seesaw between the of a battle between a knowledge producing or a knowledge dependent democracy versus a democracy which is run through public opinion and all of that. So one of the biggest challenges for governance, which is not always a democratic one, the way we understand governance today is not exactly always democratic, but it is how do we run things the best way, and by taking help of experts. And so governance is this, but government is different. We can't be run by experts all the time. Democracies, after all, at the end of the day, has to be by the people. So we have to. And so democracy at times, I think, I take a little unkindly the fact that that democracy is at times appears like a kind of a justification for any kind of a view, so to say, and that is why, or any kind of an opinion. We can't have just democracy, cannot be a melange of different opinions together, which is why more and more people are now talking about an epistocracy as against a democracy, and who are very critical of democracy itself, and who are now saying that there is a reason to turn back to Plato and to domesticate Plato within a contemporary democratic thinking. So I would say number 3 is, I would give more value to number 3, but I will also give, depending on the question, also give value to number 1 also. So I look forward to more questions. You can also type your questions in the chat box.
Sir, namaskar. Sir, ଆପଣ ତ ଓଡ଼ିଆ ଲୋକ, ଆମର ସବୁ most of the students from ଓଡ଼ିଆ medium, ଟିକେ ସାର୍ ଓଡ଼ିଆ କନଭରସେସନ ଅଳ୍ପ ସମୟ କରିବା। ସାର୍ ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଯୋଉ ଗଣତନ୍ତ୍ର ଚାଲିଛି, ସାର୍ ଆମେ ତ ସେକେଣ୍ଡ ୱାର୍ଲଡ ୱାର ପରେ most of the European countries and Asian countries, they have been practicing democracy in a very good manner. ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଯୋଉ ରିସେଣ୍ଟ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ ଆମେରିକାରେ ଗଲା, ପ୍ରେସିଡେନ୍ସିଆଲ ଇଲେକ୍ସନ, ट्रम्प बर्तमान एक्सेप्ट करने राजी नुहति जो इलेक्शन प्रोसेस गला बहुत मैनिपुलेशन होती मुझे क्षमता रही ये जो कथा सर माने प्रेजेंट पर्सपेक्टिव सर अपन कहते
नहीं प्रेजेंट पर्सपेक्टिव रे इट इज माने कौन है ची माने अमेरिका रे जहां है ची सेटा होची इज अ डिरेलमेंट ऑफ द डेमोक्रेटिक प्रोसेस इटसेल्फ सेटा गोटे कंसेशन स्पीच is something that was expected always from some person but almost everybody समझ जानी थिले कि ट्रम्प एया ही करिवो so finally जे हारला परे से concede करिवोनी तार defeat टाटू and he will create more hurdles in the democratic process itself and so there we come down to the third point as to what is the character of the citizens themselves who elected Trump. So and that too in this election almost माने कितने 50% लोग ट्रम्प को वोट करते और रिपब्लिकन्स को वोट करिसेंती और it was a very closely contested election right so इतने लोग जदि अमेरिका रे 50% of the people have voted for Trump it means something माने it means that we basically deserve the kind of democracy we are in जो 50% वोट करे ना थी they are very embarrassed before the world बहुत embarrassment feel करती किंतु जो माने वोट करिसेंती ट्रम्प को they have become very adamant so Trump is the symbol of a mobilization of anti-democratic forces that are trying to take over a democracy right so he is a symbol of that mobilization that have come up in the United States to derail democracy so that is how I am looking at it more एया होची मोर evaluation जा हेची
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Sir, you all know that the railway is one of the most service producing industry of the government. Service sector, not industry of the government. And if a democratic government.
Sorry, good minute. प्रॉब्लम होची जो माने क्वेश्चंस पचारू ना ठीक है प्लीज म्यूट कर दियो निजु एटा के डिस्टरबेंस होची गोटे कल्याणी बेहरा बोली जे मते जे आप पूर्ण क्वेश्चन पे पचार थिले प्लीज अपन को निजु को म्यूट कर दियो हां थैंक यू नाउ प्लीज आस्क
sir that the railway is one of the most service producing sector of the government and if a democratic government at any time taking a decision of the privatizing railway how democracy what is the power of the democracy to protect their interest or the interest of the public and against this undemocratic decision do the people have any power to take any kind of action against the undemocratic decision of the democratic government
well when we have in a representative democratic model in a representative democratic model मैडम आपण को टिके ये टाको म्यूट कर दियंतु ताले मु जहा कहि भी समस्त मु सुबी गय थैंक यू हां सो in a representative democratic model so what the public wants is always represented by the voice of the government so the government because once it is elected the government can always say that this is what in the true interest of the public now what the public wants or does not want and whether or not it is democratic or undemocratic you and I can speak many things but basically we have elected a government to act on our behalf and to take so some rights may have been violated but the government can always claim that it is in the best interest of the public now if the public doesn't believe in that it is free to vote out that particular government and to install a new government which will then do exactly what the public has wanted and so the public so the public opinion can then shape the manifestos of political parties. ହେଲା so माने आमे जहाँ चाहूचे सेटा आमे जेतले सरकार करू किछि गोटे करूछंती and we think that privatization हे गला, it is undemocratic and all that, but how many of us speak? If more and more people speak, then the government listens. If a few sections speak, government will always say, oh, these are some of the views, and whatever we do, there will always be opposition to this or that. The government can always come along and say that. So if it is really undemocratic, then that government should be voted out in the next elections. But then there is another problem. That is, how do we really take care of the different interests of the constituency or of the country, in fact, should a 50+1 rule be always suffice? You know what happened in Bihar, for instance, we know that it was again a very razor thin majority, right, that the NDA got. Now, should we completely ignore the views and interests of the views that the opposition parties have, because they also represent almost half of the population of Bihar? So it means that our representative system has somewhat failed. That is another question I'm getting at, another issue that I'm getting at. कि our system kahin tike fail kari aichi, because we are looking at it, and this is one of the limitation of the first past the post system. That a first past the post system, nobody gets a majority of the vote, but anybody who gets the highest gets elected. So that person may have got only maybe 20% of the votes, but the 19 other candidates have got less than 20% votes and have lost the election. So this is one of the problems of representation in a first past the post model, which then comes down to the challenge number 2 as to how do we include people who remain unrepresented and what are the different models. So for instance, a proportional representation system जदि हमें अमर थांता ताहले ए जो वॉइसेस गुडा जो आपण कहउचंती जोडा बाहर रहिला, गवर्नमेंट बाहर रहिला, एगुडा सब पार्लियामेंट रे थांता. And the best thing about a proportional representation system is that no one vote is wasted. No, not a single vote is wasted. But in a first past the post system that we have in India or the United States, more than half of the votes are wasted, right? Because anybody who gets the highest number of votes gets elected. So that is one of the problems of representative democracy. But otherwise, my response to you is that, if you think that the government is undemocratic, citizens have all the right to vote it out and to get a new government in place, which can undo the damage that has been done by the previous government.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Acharya. One Susri Arvita Das, please stop presenting. Susri Arvita, please stop presenting. Yes. Anybody having any question, they can liberty to ask Dr. Acharya. It is already time now. So I must expect some more questions from my participants.
I see one question in the chat box,
Yeah.
and that is by Usha Rani Das. She is one of my former students.
Yeah.
And sir, is our Indian democracy, in our Indian democracy, is the real picture of democratic government? Is it fulfilling the real desire of a pure democratic country? We are still not a pure democratic country, I would say, but is it really fulfilling? Yeah, this is, I think I've already given an answer to this in response to that previous question. And look, Dekho, Usha, and this is something I want to discuss, and this is what Tocqueville himself had said, that democracy is like, is trying to achieve a certain equality of conditions. If you have to look at, one best example to understand democracy is to look at the flow of a river. So the flow of a river always goes forward, it never goes backward, right? Right? And from a upper altitude to a lower altitude, the river always flows downward until it meets the sea, right? So over a period of time, we become more and more equal. We never become less and less equal. We never go back in time. So this is something that was pointed out by Tocqueville, and it was a brilliant, he very brilliantly captured the whole understanding of what equality of condition implies in a democracy. So the reason I'm using this example, Usha, is because I'm trying to say that we have become more democratic than we were before. Yet, some very grievous challenges lie before us, that in trying to become very democratic at times, what happens is that if there is a government is formed and it has an absolute majority and then nobody questions it, then the government arrogates to itself a certain kind of a power which it refuses to let go. And then it can, it can have very negative and deleterious impact on the functioning of democracy itself. So my first response is that by degrees we have improved. We have become more and more democratic. So earlier on, other backward classes, for instance, were not part of the democratic revolution. So as Christophe Jaffrelot says, that the second democratic revolution came up with the inclusion of the other backward classes in the electoral system. No, true. There will be some, ups and downs, but we have to include people. And in terms of inclusion, Indian democracy looks much better than what used to be 20 or 30 years back, right? Where it was completely controlled by the upper caste groups and the elite, people coming from elite background controlling the Indian politics. So we have gone far ahead, and yet some of these challenges remain. So. We may not always deserve the kind of government we get, but who does? So if you invest power, if the system invests too much, sorry, Usa, you wanted to ask? Are you asking something more?
Yes. Another question is there. Indians, we are the most successful democratic country in the world. But our neighbor, Pakistan, is running a government, a dictatorial government in the name of democracy. आशंका सृष्टि हुए आमर पड़ोसी सारे बहुत दुष्ट मो फैमिलीटा भल होते मुझे गोटे भल बाटे नहीं रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी and Pakistan's dictatorial government. What is the future of it?
Well, I think that democracy in South Asia, our subcontinent, has had an uneven past and is likely to has an uneven present and is likely to have an uneven future. Right? This all depends on the foundations we have laid for ourselves. The Indian model laid very secure and stable foundations by, bringing in the visions and designs of people like Ambedkar, Nehru, Gandhi, and it was an open thing. And although the majority of the people called themselves Gandhians, in the Constituent Assembly deliberations, if you read them, you will find that not all people agreed completely with Gandhi. And yet they all called themselves Gandhians. So in the strictest democratic sense, everybody was open to deliberation, to an open deliberation about what are the values that we need to preserve in our constitution, which will then give a very solid and a secure roadmap for the future. So future by roadmap, 1950 we had agreed on that roadmap. A big problem hochi ki now we want to revise that we the people. Who are the we? Are we Hindus that we are the only people who should have this country, or how can we then revisit that question of we? Ebbe se problem ta hochi. Kintu aji jaye se problem nathila. But Pakistan, Bangladesh, emanakar foundation si thoda weak thila sabu bele. Muluru hi se foundation ta weak thila. But se foundation ta weak thila, ame jodi kahiba, it is never in our good interest that a non-democracy exists in Pakistan or Bangladesh. We should always, it is in our best interest that these countries not only prosper democratically, but also prosper economically. Right? So it is in the collective interest of the South Asians that all these countries should prosper. You know, I think that competitive spirit with Pakistan has to go, because I don't think that we should always be aiming guns at Pakistan and saying that you are not a democracy, you are a dictatorship, you are a terror funding state. If you keep doing this, it will never have that room to reform itself. And so it is in our best interest to lend that helping hand to Pakistan. No, not of course on terrorism, but on other things. To lend a helping hand and to say that in the welfare of your citizens also lies the collective welfare of the subcontinent. In the welfare of Bangladeshi citizens lies the collective welfare of South Asia. Unless and until India develops this attitude, we will always have a troubling Pakistan. That is my view. You may have your own views and you may disagree with me, but I sincerely think that we have to lend that helping hand. And if we lend that helping hand, then Pakistan will become more and more democratic. You must have seen that during peace times, when there is some kind of a peace, the democratic forces realign themselves in Pakistan. But whenever there is a war, there is always a kind of, you have the rise in military authoritarianism in that particular state. So it is in our best interest that our neighborhood is surrounded by democracies. Because as Michael Doyle once said, and he's an international relations specialist at Harvard, who claimed that democracies do not go to war with each other. So who are our threats today? Pakistan and China, and they are not democracies. So we should pray that they become democracies, because then that threat goes away.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Acharya. It is already time, so I think no more questions to ask by anybody for us. But I think you have enhanced by the intellectual outfit of my students and the participants in many ways. You have rightly presented the topic, that is democracy and government. You have told many things in regards to the social context and theory, and also competitive understanding of the democratic process. So, the rest of the participants, they have not anything in regards to the democratic practice and presence of various political parties, how they to govern the Indian democracy. And it is very much vibrant and eloquent presentation of the things. I think my students have benefited in many more ways, and also the participants who are with us, and thanks to Dr. Barik, who has asked brilliant questions, and he was answering to that in the intellectual way. And you have also rightly presented the idea of human rights, that is the equal chance of participating in the process and quality of taking decisions. Various things you have presented. So I must applaud your presenting the things in a better way. So now I request my colleague, Dr. Afwal, to present a vote of thanks to you. And at the outset, I must thank all those participants who have joined with the Google Meet, and also we are going in Facebook Live. So thanks to all the participants, Dr. Barik, Dr. Chita Mishra, and many friends are there, and Dr. Usharani Das of your own student. And so I am very much thankful to you, Dr. Acharya, and also my classmate, your best better half, Madhumita. Perhaps she is watching the things. Okay. So I am very much pleased, I am feeling very much pleasure that you will come down to my campus, that is Narsaghi College, and address many intellectual things in regards to democracy and its practice to my students. So thanks a lot for your kind acceptance of my request and the presentation of the thing. So at the outset, I want to thank all participants of Facebook Live and the Google Meet, and all my students and participants. So at last, I request my colleague, Dr. Das, Umesh Das, to present vote of thanks and wind up the webinar. So Dr. Das, please.
Sir, I am very much grateful to you because you have dedicated most of your valuable times for presenting a speech on democracy and its practice, and you have also clarified the questions, answered the questions in a very beautiful manner, and the present India-Pak relationship is also clarified by in a very good manner. I am also thankful to you, and I am also thankful to our principal, esteemed principal, Dr. Amyo Kumar Jana, the best friend of you, and for whom we have got your presence in our campus on online. I am also thankful to my HOD who have dedicated much of our time for this seminar. I am also thankful to all the participants also. Very good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm here today because I could not say no to Dr. Amiya Jena, who is my old classmate.
Thank you. Please don't fail.
Thank you.
Send me your signature specimen, please, for the contribution of the certificates to the participants. Please, I will later on tell you to send me the your signature. That is why we need some signature to present the certificates to the participants. That's why I am telling. Yes, all the participants are also requested to fill up the feedback form so that we can have the certificates, the participant certificates. Thank you all. Thank you, Ashok. Thank you, Niranjan sir.
My thanks to Dr. Jenna. My thanks to Dr. Jenna for organizing this wonderful webinar with Professor Acharya.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, we are compressed by the present pandemic situation to go on live on this medium only.
No, it was my pleasure. It was
Yes,
my
sir. We are very much happy to see you on virtual meeting. My good friend Ashok, he has agreed to come down to this place by virtually, so that's why I am extending all my support and thankfulness to all of you because it is Ashok who has made it success. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste. Yes. Thank you, Ashok. Bye. Bye. कोणती रेकॉर्डिंग आवाज बंद करूया रेकॉर्डिंग बंद करू ये मैडम नीचे देखो रेकॉर्डिंग देखो